from the showroom here at SwissWatchExpo. We're talking this morning about the Rolex Day-Date President. Creed, they've made a whole lot of different versions of this over the years. It's kind of hard to keep track of what the changes were, isn't it?
That's right. There's the standard set, which you have to roll the hands backwards and forwards to set the date and the date. There's the quick set, which sets just the date only. And then there's the double quick set, which sets the day and the date very quickly.
One of my favorites is this one here. This one was made in 1958. It was the second generation, if you will, of the Day-Date. The first one came out in '57, but that one didn't last very long. It had a few issues that Rolex wanted to iron out. And so this was considered the first successful Day-Date. And it's interesting, the hands are the alpha style. They're not the bar style that most of the presidents have later. It's a pipe hand dial. It's beveled down at the edges, really beautiful. And this one is the first one that said superlative chronometer officially certified on the dial, which almost every Rolex since then has said, but this was the first one to do it. So it's a really interesting collector piece with the different hands, different dial, and being the first one that really was the successful first Day-Date.
And this one had the illuminated hands as well originally at some point with the illumination dots. Of course, they no longer work. They've long since chemically deteriorated. This one's also kind of got an interesting dial because it's got a 3D effect on each one of the markers for the hours. So this is not quite a baton. This is more like a hybrid between a baton and a wide boy. It's a very unique and interesting dial. It's very 3D. It's got an acrylic crystal too. I think people should know that. In the early days, they were all acrylic crystals. They were not sapphire crystals.
Right. That one came out in, I think, the early 80s. 82, I think, was when they switched over to sapphire on the President.
1978.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Even earlier than I thought.
And technically, they said 77, but I don't think they appeared on the market until 78.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the other things about this watch that's interesting is that this is the very first one that you see in the what will be known later as the President series, was not at this time. And in order to set the time, you have to run the hands, obviously, or I'm sorry, set the date, you have to run the hands clockwise. In order to set the day, you have to run it counterclockwise.
Wow.
So there's a lot of twisting and turning going on this particular watch to set things if it gets out of whack.
So you mentioned the difference between calling them President and Day-Date. If I'm not mistaken, the bracelet is actually what is called the President, and the watch is always the Day-Date. We refer to them generally among Rolex lovers. We just call the whole series the President, but it's actually this bracelet with the wide center links that's the President. The watch is always a Day-Date.
Right. So the President was most associated with the first American president that wore the watch, and then it subsequently became known as the President for that reason. It's a very simple routine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are the different styles you've got out here? What is that one over there?
So this is a quartz, known as the Oysterquartz, and this is not, of course, known as a President. It's just the Oysterquartz Day-Date. Why? Because it doesn't have the original President bracelet on it. Interestingly enough, though, if you look at how close, it's a flattened out version of the President bracelet. Definitely. A little bit wider, a little bit more modern, if you will. Of course, it didn't debut until the late 1970s, in around 1977, 1978. Interestingly enough, this is a quick set dial only. It only quick sets the date. You still have to run the hands counterclockwise in order to set the day. So Monday through Friday. Now, one of the interesting things about this particular watch is that it's in Italian. So all the days are in Italian.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool.
It definitely has that retro 70s look to it. And to make a note about that double quick set or single quick set on the day and the date, realize that if you wear the watch all the time and it stays running, or if you use a winding box, obviously not on the Oysterquartz because it'll stay running regardless with the battery power, but the day of the week doesn't change. So you would only really move the date forward at the end of months that have less than 31 days. You really don't have to do anything with the days, so it's not really a big issue.
Right, and you better speak Italian if you want to have this watch.
Right.
It's really cool.
Quick.
I didn't realize how many different languages that Rolex would produce the date dial in. Most of Germanic and Latin and English is what you will see on these particular items. So we're going to move on a little bit to the Platinum series. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about what differentiates the difference between this quick set and the double quick set versus the non-quick set at all.
Okay.
But first, what I want to do is talk about what happens between white gold and platinum. It's very difficult to tell. I mean, even no matter what light you're in, it's difficult to tell which one is which. The platinum is always the most heavy. Just by picking it up and feeling them, you can feel a significant difference in them. But these two happen to be the double QuickSet. So what happens is, whenever you go to set this watch, it's a very quick forward and backward movement. So when you pull the crown out one spot, you will be able to set the day by turning the crown towards the 6, and the date by turning the crown towards the 12. So it's a really quick one-out click, move it forward, move it backward, and you're adjusting the date. And then, of course, for the second click is the time. So this is a very easy watch. This is the double QuickSet. Both of these models are double QuickSet. The double QuickSet appeared in 1988.
Okay.
Yeah. So approximately 11 years after the original QuickSet date is when the double QuickSet appeared. Also in 1977, the sapphire crystal appeared with the QuickSet date as well. So moving on, with this particular model, this is one of the wide boys.
Okay.
This one has the wide hands, the wide markers on the dial. This is not a QuickSet at all. This is still run it forward, run it backwards.
And it's the acrylic crystal stuff.
It is still the acrylic crystal. And they're beautiful watches. Now, one of the things, these are, particularly the wide boy is my favorite. I find that particular dial over the years is the best. It's just the most appealing visually. Now, the other thing that I wanted to show everybody is the date just. This is the solid white gold date just. It is a QuickSet, and a lot of people confuse this with the day-date model. They also confuse it with the President model. So this particular watch will not come with the President bracelet. It's just the date just bracelet.
Okay.
However, the difference is between these models, this one actually can be bought with a strap versus a bracelet. Whereas the original, what we know as the President's, only came on a bracelet. And this is one of the more updated versions too, because it's got the new updated, most updated clasp.
Very pretty watch. Beautiful.
Yeah, that blue dial with that alligator, that brown alligator, that caramel look, is an awesome combination. Yeah. And it just sparkles and shines too. I mean, that blue dial in the sun gets amazing. Now, let's talk a minute about what differentiates all these watches. The number set. If it's 4 numbers, it's a non-QuickSet watch. So for example, when you start out with, I'm going to pull this one, the wide boy out. So this one is an 1803. 4 numbers, no QuickSet. Then you move on to the single QuickSet. There are 5 numbers. And you get to what we know as the 180. When you get into the double QuickSet, you get into the 6-digit. So you go from 4 to 5 to 6. Also with not only that, but in the early days, the number set was 182, 2 being double QuickSet. Okay. Versus 180. Okay. If that makes sense.
That does make sense.
It took me a long time to learn that nomenclature. So 4 numbers, non-QuickSet. 5 numbers with a 0, single QuickSet. Okay. 5 numbers with a 2, 182, double QuickSet. And that's how it works. Now, when you go into the 6 digits, things change drastically. This happened in 2000. This watch got a solid gold bracelet, a heavier case. So the watch feels more significant and more heavy. It doesn't ding in the center as much as the old ones. The old ones were hollow if you hit them hard enough. Right. And you'll find that on some of the old ones. And then on top of that, the new ones have new ceramic pins through them, so they're a lot more durable, and there's like virtually no flex from the very beginning. You can see that. Now, just because you have a little bit of flex, and I want to make this extraordinarily clear, just because you have a little bit of flex in the old ones doesn't mean that it's not a wearable watch. It also doesn't mean that it's in bad shape. It actually is in great shape. These had a little bit of a flex just from the very beginning because they were hollow, and they didn't want them to kink or bend. They would actually physically break the pins out of them if they didn't have a little bit of flex. So when everybody asks, how much flex does it have? This is virtually the same as when it was brand new. Having a little bit of flex is absolutely fine. I think people need to understand that.
Yeah,
all the blogs get caught up in this whole, oh, how much flex does it have, and it can't be good if it's certain. How much percentage is it? Listen, if this thing bows down and it looks like you can tie it in a knot, we have a problem.
Right.
Right? But if it has some sort of flex in it, it's not a problem at all.
And here at SwissWatchExpo, we really don't deal in the ones that are a problem.
That's right.
We only deal in the best examples, and so anything from us, it's going to have decades of life still in it.
Absolutely. Probably, if anybody wants to put a percentage on it, everything that we have is more like 80% and above.
Right.
So save your questions about the bracelets. It's fine does it have a lot more flex than another one? Perfectly understandable question. But for the most part, we're never going to sell you a bracelet that you can't use service life for years to come.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So that's a lot about the date, the president, and the date just that people need to know.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for clearing all that up. I do appreciate the decoding of the mystery of the Rolex numbering system. That will help a lot going forward. And a great collection of watches this morning.
It is. It's beautiful.